Yeah, I do find your accent really funny, and the fact that if I'm not paying attention, you sound like Alan Fisher. But
Someone said this, they're like, is this Alan Fisher's second account? And I'm like, come on, we're not
is this
that
Alan Fishin's
similar.
brother, Alan Fishin?
I mean, when he was living in New Jersey, I kind of just assumed that you were trying to be an Alan impersonator at first.
God damn it.
Yeah.
God damn it, Matt.
But it's okay. I realize you're a different guy.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Better Places podcast. And joining me today on this podcast is Mike from the Urban Jersey Guy YouTube channel.
Hey, everybody.
And Matt from Metamodernism.
Hey, I'm Matt.
They got you said something. We're gonna create an AI robot of you.
Yep.
Sorry.
That's all you need. That's all you need these days.
And I'm Nick, the rural urbanist.
It's been a little while, but ever since we last talked, I actually have been looking for an apartment the whole entire time. And it's a bit of a struggle because I'm looking for a place in Jersey City, and there's this kind of decision that you need to make when you get there. You have to decide between, do you want this old style walk-up that's 150 years old, it's filled with lead and asbestos in it, you also have like really creaky windows and paper thin, everything that creaks a little bit, or your choice is between a slightly older apartment, which was made a little bit better, but all the amenities are starting to get grimy. So like 80s apartments, kind of a little bit more meat on the walls than the modern ones, which are now like paper thin, like you can hear your neighbors. And that's the issue I'm dealing with right now. So I know for a fact, like when I walk into a place and it has stick frame, like I can knock on the wall and it's hollow, like that's an instant out. So
yeah, so basically everywhere in America at this point.
Yeah. So like this is like the issue that everyone has with 5/1s. Like some people are like, it's aesthetic. And like I don't really care too much about how the buildings looks on the outside. Some people do it better, some people do it worse. The actual functional value of a 5/1 is terrible for like livable experience, unless they put in a ton of effort not for it to be terrible, because it's these wooden framed floors over a concrete base, hence 5/1. And type 5 means it's wooden framed, and type 1 means it's like non-combustible concrete or stone. And these wooden framed, they're always hollow wall because insulating adds tens of thousands of dollars to each an individual apartment.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think in Germany we don't build anything besides apartments which are either insulated brick or concrete, and that's, I would say, 90% of the new construction. So it's really crazy to see that everything in the U.S. is this kind of balloon frame, stick frame, 5/1 stuff just to save money and to get through the zoning loopholes, because that's just not how things are done over here. And
yeah, the international zoning code, which is only used by places in North America, what requires the stick frame homes.
It's like the World Series of zoning codes. Like, It's only a series between U.S. teams. So, yeah, I don't know. And I'm happy we're building some density, right? However, it's the same problem that even actually a lot of modern German neighborhoods have, where they're built to finish, because they're actually not, a lot of them are not mixed use. So a lot of the newer neighborhoods in Germany have similar problems to suburbs in the U.S., where you get these kind of dead neighborhoods, but they're just really big, dense apartment blocks that are very modernist, but there might not be a bakery or even like a supermarket. Not to the extent of some of the places in the U.S., but still, it's definitely a bit of a problem here.
Are they like pretty far out from like town center too?
It depends, honestly, because if I think about one of the neighborhoods that I lived in, right, it was actually pretty good housing stock, and it was a good apartment. And it was it was maybe 10 minutes from the train station, but it was further from like the historical center, right? So there was stuff around. There were good supermarkets nearby. However, there was nothing else in that neighborhood save one bakery. And those supermarkets were like on the outside of this neighborhood. So yeah, it wasn't as practical as like what we come to think of a mixed use neighborhood. Still had a lot of the problems of the suburbs, you know.
Yeah, and that's another big thing with the like developments model. When I was looking in Jersey City, a lot of these places are full block developments. So the benefit of that is you get all these amenities with these full block developments. They'll have like a courtyard, they'll have a dog park, they'll have a pool, they'll have like maybe even like a tennis court. But then you also have that everything is completely self-contained. It's kind of on an island by itself because it was intentionally made to be an island by itself. You're not going to have like a grocery store on the bottom floor or a bunch of little shops. It's like this is all brand new, and then the development next to it's going to be the same thing. It's going to be a brand new full block development, another brand new full block development, and they're only going to try to get like Class A people in the bottom, which is like in the suburbs it would be like Walmart. In the city it would be more like a Target.
Yeah.
So you're kind of stuck with that.
And I want to bring Matt into the conversation because I think you guys have a lot of this stuff in California, right?
At least around where I live, like a majority of the new developments are kind of the 5/1, but there are a few taller buildings every once in a while just because the high rents can support larger projects, and those are typically like concrete. But even when they'll do those projects, they'll have like a full concrete and steel tower, and then they'll just like build a second building that's a 5/1 next to it just to really take advantage of the lot and kind of build as much as they can in the space they have.
Yeah, so like the anchor tenant is this one large building, and then it's like other like any empty land around there just pops up with like the cheapest thing that's possible.
Yeah, generally. I guess the thing that's weird is just there's so much municipal fragmentation that every city kind of does things differently because they have different rules that encourage different kinds of developments. So where I am, like almost all buildings are being built mixed use with some kind of retail on the bottom. Now, they're not always being filled, but occasionally a taco place or some other kind of business will open up, and that's pretty nice.
Because I think that's kind of interesting because I was looking at that picture you sent earlier of you sitting outside enjoying the sun, and I was like, God damn it, California could be such a paradise, and yet so many major ways they F it up, and we end up with like a lot of empty retail space on the ground floor, or not enough mixed use, or it's like, or it's not walkable, or...
I think it depends on the place, and of course the places where it is the best tend to be the most expensive, so a lot of people are locked out of that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there is just so much potential. I hope that someday that can all be realized. It's just a little tough with how the development goes now because a lot of places that are up and coming and are becoming walkable, they just don't have the investment in either transportation or just redoing the streets to make them more walkable that a lot of this new retail space just doesn't get filled out. So COVID really compounded this with a lot of new retail space, at least in my city, coming online right as the pandemic was happening. So there's still a lot of vacancy.
I also wanted to talk a little bit about like these newer high-rise developments as well, because I ran into a lot of them in Jersey City, and like I've obviously been an outside observer of a lot of these for a while. So I actually got to tour a lot of them. There's this building called Journal Squared, which is like, I believe it's the third largest building in New Jersey. So I went and toured it, and it's right on top of a metro station that takes you straight to New York City. It's kind of felt a little bit cheap inside, which was like a little disappointing. And when you got down to it, you could just tell what the construction was when you went in there. It was it had these concrete floor plates, but it still had the stick frame walls between. So it almost was the same issue as a 5/1 where you'd hear your neighbors. And there was this constant thing that happened when I visit all these new buildings. I also visit Irby, which is a relatively famous design. It looks like stacked cubes that are slightly offset. So if you can imagine that, like slightly offset stacked cubes, is that they had they oftentimes went for a kind of like bachelor pad-esque building, or or almost like a converted loft-esque building, but it's not a converted loft, it's a brand new building. So they have these bedrooms with transoms rather than it having an outside window. It has a little fake window near the top of the like above the door to let light in from the living room. So if you think about it, if you have a wife or a husband or something, and or like a roommate, and they're watching TV in the living room, like you're gonna see the light from the TV.
Yeah,
or if it like gets a little bright in the morning, and you don't have all the shades closed in the living room, it's going to be bright in your bedroom.
Do you want me to like blow your mind? Are you ready for this? So
Blow my mind.
All right. So in Germany, what I've seen so far is the smart version of that, which is yes, transom window. However, not from the sleeping room into the main room where the windows are, from the main room where the sleeping room is into the bathroom. And like that makes more sense to me. Like if you're going to put something that you don't want windows in, it's probably your bathroom. And if you need more natural light, there's just like a strip of those like 80s glass block cube things up top above where the shower is. And that lets in enough natural light that your bathroom doesn't feel like a dungeon with that really cold fluorescence, but also that like the main room and the bedroom has enough light. And this is what's the thing that is mind-blowing. In Germany, I don't know if you've seen this, but they have in most buildings that are built in the past 30, 40, 50 years, complete blackout security. They're not shades. They're like it's like a rolling shutter. So it comes down from the top. It's built into the building. You have a rope, and it friction locks into place. You can have it at different settings. You can have it so that air can come in and out. You can have it so it's completely closed off. And it makes it, if you're on the ground floor, it's hard to smash through it because it's kind of a metallic material. And then it completely blacks out. So it's like adding a wall. It's like installing a wall at night to your building. You can have complete darkness.
And you're saying like this is like almost like a security gate, like it's on the exterior, or
it's built into a track between the exterior wall and the interior wall.
I don't think that would ever be allowed in the U.S. for fire codes, because if there's a way that you can't access a building through the window, they'll absolutely not allow that.
It's not like titanium or some shit. It's still aluminum or something. It would be the kind of thing that by the time the thief gets into it, the police are already there. You know what I mean? And it's also like completely possible for the fire department to open it. Like it's not a problem. And also the building is not combustible. You have to remember that.
Yeah, that's true. The building you're not dealing with 5/1.
Yeah. Like if an apartment burns out, you know what's going to burn out? That apartment. Like that's it. You know, somebody could completely be barbecued and like the rest of the building would probably be fine. Don't quote me on that.
I will not be taking legal advice.
Good. So moving this forward a little bit to the kind of the point that you had, Mike, and I'm curious what all of our answers is to this. So when looking for an apartment, what do you guys look for? What have you guys seen? And what's making it difficult at the moment where we all are to find an apartment?
Yeah. So whenever I'm looking for an apartment, the first thing, since I've always had this issue, is like if there's a little bit of noise, it does like really kind of set me off, is sound transmission. Like this building, I need to not hear my neighbors above and below, and I need to not be hearing the street outside. Very important to me. I also lived in a fairly dense city, the densest in the US, essentially, for quite a while, and it was very quiet in that building because people weren't driving down with their lifted pickup trucks like they are in my current place, which you'll hear every once in a while. The second thing is like, so that already knocks out like almost all new buildings. Even some of the more like cool looking high rises, those still have a ton of sound transmission. Second issue is like layout, and all of the layouts are kind of like not really conducive to living with someone while not stepping on their toes while you're being there. Where it's like sometimes you want to actually like both be working from home and not be like, okay, I have to walk past this person just to use the bathroom. So it's like there's a lot of bathrooms and bedrooms, which doesn't make sense to me. Like, why would you build a new building with a railroad style bathroom, which is a very, very old concept. People don't really do that anymore. Why are we bringing it back? And then I want to be able to have some access to outdoors, where a lot of these places, their only outdoor space is on like a fifth floor or like eighth floor sky deck, even if it's like a 30-story building. Like Matt was talking about how those like 5/1s are surrounding like a tall building. Like a lot of these buildings, even in Jersey, are very similar, where they'll have like a smaller sky deck portion. And that is just like a wind tunnel. If you stand out there, it's nearly unusable space. It's incredibly like funneled wind. In the winter, it's going to be too cold. In the summer, there's only going to be a very marginal time when it works. The like temperature and like not too windy. You might as well just consider it not usable space. So I'd rather live right next to a park than have a crappy rooftop deck like that. And last thing is like, I used to like old building stock, but if your old housing stock is roughly the same price as a new building, then I can't justify it. I'm not gonna live without a washing machine again. So it's like all of these things lead me to like only like a couple buildings are kind of like available to me after you get all these criteria done, and they end up just being like retrofits of old factory buildings, essentially.
Yeah. So basically, all of the apartment housing stock in New England is what you're saying.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah, they're all. It's all.
I want to go live in a textile mill.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's literally everything here.
So, I guess I recently did a little bit of apartment hunting. My rent got raised on me a few months ago, so it kind of inspired me to go and look and see what is out there. At least for me, I think the most important thing is probably the location. I just really want to be able to access most of the places I want to go without having to drive, maybe being close to transportation, stuff like that. But I really like a good layout. I want to make sure that all the space in my place is useful. I currently do live in a studio, but it's big enough, and the kitchen is at least separate from the place where I live, so that's kind of nice. I think a really nice form of housing stock is an older building that has been renovated nicely. So the current building I'm in was built in like the 20s or something, and then renovated in the 90s, so it is still pretty good. It's not really crappy. Everything's fairly good on the furnishing side, but I think, you know, with like the sound transmission stuff you're talking about, that's pretty good in my current place because it's all like thick plaster walls.
Lath and plaster, yieldy.
Yep. Yeah, but I guess like, you know, the one place that I was looking for new apartments mostly was in my same building, but maybe just a larger unit. So I've actually already toured 2 different of those larger units, and they were both nice, but they were smaller 1-bedrooms, so it really didn't feel like that much more space than my studio, so I've passed on them. But just, you know, if I ever see anything else that comes up that looks good, I might go and tour it and see it.
Yeah, cool. The thing about like location was also big for me as well. I can understand, because I think I said in an earlier podcast, I moved out to the suburbs and I can't stand it. I can't fucking stand it. I need to get out of here. I need to go back to a place where I can go to a bodega at like 1:00 in the morning.
What was your original impetus to like move out there? That's what I'm wondering, because I remember you were living somewhere much more dense, and then you weren't.
Yeah, so I was in Hoboken. The landlord sold the building, so we didn't have a place to live. We put all our stuff in storage, and we traveled for 7-8 months.
Oh, okay.
And then after that, we were like, okay, we lived in random cities for 8 months. We've yet to live in the suburbs, and we were thinking like, oh yeah, maybe we'd like living in a place that's still commutable to New York, but is a little bit slower. And it was only like a matter of a couple months for us to figure out like, no, that wasn't the right thing. It was a little bit of an expensive learning experience.
It's good. It's good that you guys agree on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were very much at the same time where we looked at each other and we're like, this isn't going to work out. We can't have restaurants closed on Mondays.
Ooh, yeah. It's funny. Like, if I can jump in, I guess I had pretty much the exact same experience with my wife yesterday. Um, so, like, we've always had kind of the same priorities with, like, we both want peace and quiet. And we do actually, the thing about the noise in the building, that was never incredibly important to me. I mean, I think maybe because when I was a kid, I didn't have any experience living in something that wasn't a house. But the thing is, like, for my wife, sound is incredibly important to her when she sleeps, and she sleeps with earplugs in. And same thing with light. That's why, yeah, she grew up with these Rolladen, I think is what they're called. Horrible American accent. And because of that, they're just like complete blackout. She can't sleep with like any amount of light now. So like,
I have the same issue.
yeah. Okay, then you understand. She listens to this. So
when I grew up, real quick story. I was I lived in like a bump out that was an addition to like our house, and it only had one small window that was like 2 feet across, and it faced like southwest. It faced a direction that never got sun. Period. Like full stop. So it was always dark in my bedroom.
Yeah. And it's like, it's funny. I think when you get used to it, like I had those horrible like aluminum shades that we have in the US, which never completely close the distance between them. And no matter how hard you try, Matt's nodding his head. Yeah, and for me, that like just wasn't as important, and I was also used to more sound because it was a 1980s like balloon frame house next to a highway, so it wasn't the quietest or the darkest place. But yeah, and so getting back to yesterday, we basically had we went to Heidelberg, which is close to where we're both working now, and not where she grew up, but it was such a beautiful day, and we were walking through the city, and we both just like, we're walking through this older neighborhood, I drive a V8 motor, revving through the neighborhood. My name's Jeremiah Clarkson.
It's not a Better Places podcast episode without one of our lines getting interrupted by a motorcycle gang.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, so we were both walking through these old neighborhoods, like, early 1900s, late 1800s, of which a lot of these actually don't exist anymore in Germany, just because of the war. There's, like, not as much brick architecture left. Heidelberg is very unique in that way, and we both just looked at each other and were like, the place we're living now is awful. We had kind of told ourselves, okay, we only need to be at this job at the office in person for the first 6 months, and we thought, okay, we'll move there for a little bit, and then we'll just go back and work from where she's from. But what we kind of realized yesterday is we'll probably be here for a little bit longer than we were planning, because we don't hate our jobs completely. And the second thing is we also like the city of Heidelberg. It's really incredible, honestly. Recommend anybody to visit it. I think what drove us over the edge was we'd been looking for places with furniture, because when you move as much as we do, it's really painful to have to move all your furniture with you, and so we were just like basically living out of off and on looking for Airbnbs, was what we'd resorted to, and we were wasting so much money that we finally
are like finding fully furnished places as rare in Germany as it is in the US, because those are very rare.
Yes, it's very difficult. Okay. And I mean, think about it this way, everybody's got a different taste in furniture, and it's like, how do you furnish, if I was a landlord, I wouldn't know how to do it correctly. Do you just buy everything IKEA and replace it every year? How do you do that? It's not the easiest thing, because
if it's not a single room occupancy like thing, it's going to be like nearly impossible.
Yeah, and it also does get expensive too when you have to furnish a whole apartment. It's totally correct. And yeah, I think like the place that I'm at right now, it makes sense because I'm just traveling for work. It's near a train station, and it's near a big insurance company. So there's lots of business travels here, and there's a pretty limited supply of this kind of places. But like where we are, the supply is even more limited because it's next to not next to, but very close to the fourth largest software company in the world, which our viewers can look up if they want to. But
I think someone already guessed in the comments last time.
Yeah, I think they did. It's the one that everybody always forgets about because it literally has an interface that looks like ass.
You could have done docs yourself.
Yeah, I don't care. Not that much, anyways. But the place we're living, it's also filled with people that smoke all the time. The woman downstairs, I swear to God, she's cutting up bodies and cooking them in pies. And she just stands around in a red bathrobe all day and doesn't say anything. They have a beautiful word in German for people, like the people that live in our building. It's asozialen. It literally translates to asocial.
Okay.
Yeah, like antisocial. They're literally just these people that they don't interact with anybody. They just sit around and smoke and have like a pointless life. It's not great.
They remember a time during the communist regimes back in
the West German communist regime.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know where Heidelberg is. Don't ask me. Don't come at me.
That's okay. It's like, it's like the one place that wasn't completely bombed out in the war in like the whole country. So yeah, that's why it has an old town that like survived. It's like the example of that kind of architecture.
The example, as they say. All right, so I was thinking about this. Whenever I go on vacation, like there's like multiple different choices. You can either have like a resting vacation, or as my mom would call it, a working vacation, where like you're up and around and you're visiting museums and such. But like whenever I go on vacation, I don't ever look for a resting vacation anymore. There's always this kind of certain thing that I'm looking for. I'm always like looking for almost always museums or hiking. So I was curious, what do you guys look for in a vacation when you plan it?
I think I'm kind of programmed to do the more working vacations just because whenever I was growing up, my dad would always take us to places where we would just walk around for hours and hours. One of our favorite destinations was Key West.
Oh, yeah.
We would only rent a car just to get down there from Miami, but once we were there, we would pretty much walk everywhere. We'd never take a taxi. We'd never take a shuttle. It was just walking from one side of the island to the other. So I definitely look for walkability, but I think museums are another big thing for me. I like to not really plan out my vacations now when I go somewhere by myself. I kind of like to go somewhere where I know there's just enough stuff to do where I can wake up one day and be like, okay, it's a rainy day, so I'll go see museums, or it's a nice day and I'll go see some parks.
Yeah, like the going on vacation alone, giving you the freedom to like not have to plan anything is always really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't had that in a while, but I actually, really do enjoy, so the vacations that my wife and I go on, I think at this point they're largely to see some city that we've never been to before. And it's not even like, she's not coming from as much of an urbanist bent as I am. For her and also for myself, it's about the food there and and just like seeing the place a lot of the times. So, we did a day trip to Strasbourg. We've done day trips to Innsbruck, we're in Salzburg all the time. We've done Vienna for
I loved Innsbruck when I went there.
Yeah, Innsbruck is incredible. You wouldn't know it if you got there by car. It's apparently got some of the ugliest exurbs and suburbs of any city in the region, but it's beautiful.
Because it's like the center city is untouchable because it's like one of the oldest areas in the country.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's incredibly old there. It's in the pass between Italy and Germany. I mean, Lord knows what that part of the world has seen in the past several thousand years. So, and it's on a river. I mean, it's gorgeous at the feet of the mountains, and the old city is there.
I have a very quick story. So there was apparently some Bollywood film filmed in Innsbruck. So when I was there in the winter, or it was a little bit after ski season, so it's like no tourist would ever go there during that time. But I just went there because I was cutting through going from Germany to Italy, and the only other people there were people taking pictures of where they filmed this Bollywood, people from India who were taking pictures from where they filmed the Bollywood. And it was so funny because it was just like a handful of Indian tourists and me like walking around the streets, and you go to a restaurant and it'd be like a handful of Indian tourists, me, and like a couple locals like sitting in the back corner.
Sounds like the story of my life. To the main point on vacations, I think it's funny. I think it's important. People make excuses for themselves when they're on vacation. They do stuff they wouldn't normally do because they're on vacation. They think, oh, it's okay if I just do that. I just take the car, all this way to see this long thing super far away. And I think it's actually important for me, and people can disagree with me on this, but to like when on vacation to still try to live by your standards at some point, make sure your trash goes in the bin, take transit when you can, when it's not going to ruin your vacation or take like 5 extra hours. A trip is a trip, whether it's to work or to a museum.
Yeah, you just really got to watch out with trash cans when you're on vacation. There might be some raccoons in there.
Oh, fuck you.
All right. What? Okay. Wait. Did you guys already talk about this? Like, what is this?
No. There was a bit of a group trip to Toronto, and I was going to throw out the trash for the house, open the bin, threw the trash in, and I heard growling. Looked down, and I saw that there was a absolutely massive raccoon at the bottom of this can that I just threw the trash on top of, and it scared the living shit out of me. I jumped like 6 feet backwards, and there was a hole where I jumped backwards. So I twisted my ankle all the way around and sprained it. I hobbled back into the house, and I was like, someone's got to deal with that raccoon. I just sprained my ankle, and I don't think I can walk. And I progressively I had to do bike share to the airport because I couldn't walk anymore.
Oh my God.
Luckily it's Billy Bishop Airport, which is like actually connected to the city.
Yeah, the Toronto trash pandas are real.
It is.
They're not making it up.
Oh wait, were you there for this?
Yeah.
Oh, I did. Why did I not know you guys knew each other before, like, the internet?
Because you're a terrible friend.
I mean,
Nick.
it was because of the internet.
Yeah.
What?
I said because you're a terrible friend, and Matt said it's because of the internet.
Thanks. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I guess the big urbanist news in LA County is that tomorrow Culver City is going to vote on whether or not they will modify the existing Move Culver City bike and bus lanes project in downtown Culver City. So that one's going to be interesting. They're not really considering fully removing it, but they're either going to vote between just leaving this project the way it is now, which is kind of a quick build thing with some bollards and more temporary structures, or they're going to vote to make this permanent with new concrete curb extensions and protected bike lanes, or they're going to do this third option, which would be to restore one vehicle lane and then remove the bus lane and then make the bike lane into a combined bike and bus lane.
Oh yeah, because those work very well everywhere. There's never been issues with combined bike and bus lanes.
Yeah, especially not considering that, like, I've never met a normal bus driver who I didn't get the sense wouldn't run me over if given the chance.
There's a few of them.
Yeah, I think there's some good ones out there, but yeah, they just really got to make schedule. Like that's how they get their paycheck.
Yeah, you are in the way. Yep. But like, aren't they getting the uber funny, like they have to go through environmental review now to change this?
Yeah, so I guess the Culver City planning staff explicitly said that any modifications to this project that induce VMT, which is increasing vehicles miles traveled for basically opening up the corridor to more traffic, they would have to conduct a full environmental review under CEQA, which would make this project take way longer than just changing some paint. Which is
like the greatest fuck you to the council members who just want to bring back one car lane, because it's going to be a pain in the ass to actually get through that environmental planning process.
Yeah. So hopefully that's something that would get upheld if they make the wrong decision tomorrow, but they could also not make the wrong decision, and hopefully it won't be a problem.
The one time that the environmental review in California is used for the right thing.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. For anyone who doesn't know, they or a lot of people really like to abuse these laws to prevent new housing from being built by saying that more people is an environmental impact, and it can be a real pain. Also, for transit projects, they also have to go through the full environmental review process, and even when they can get an exemption, they have to do some environmental review to apply for and get the exemption.
California has a lot of like well-intentioned laws which are absolutely abusive to getting anything done. What's the one where they have the housing bill where it's like your rents never increase? Or not your rents, your property taxes never increase.
So it's Proposition 13, where your property tax increase is limited to a very small increment, which basically took away a whole ton of funding for the state, particularly school funding. So since then, all the public state universities now charge tuition, and in years since have started to charge a lot of tuition. And they also can't really expand the university system very much, so they just get harder and harder to get into and more exclusive.
Ronald Reagan.
And and also, stop. Aren't like some of the largest landowners like universities in California, and like they're not allowed to build anything on any of that land?
I think so. I don't know the exact details of it.
Stanford has like 1,000 acres or something insane like that.
Yeah, they do have a lot of land, and earlier, I think this year or maybe last year, there was an issue where the University of California at Berkeley was trying to build a bunch of new dorms, and they kept running into environmental review problems for it. So I think there is a new bill that either fully passed or was passed part of the way to try to make it so, that whole process is streamlined, and it had a lot of support, but it's kind of ridiculous that it even had to get there in the first place.
Yeah, like sometimes we need to be able to build dorms for students. Like that's the thing.
Yeah.
Like State College in Pennsylvania had that issue where all of the people in the town, the town named after the college, people were like, "Oh yeah, like we're building too many dorms. Like we need to stop building dorms."
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, well, it wasn't even really the dorms being a problem. It was just the fact that all of this new student housing is getting built downtown, and people didn't like that.
Can I comment on this? Because I grew up in a university town.
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
Watched this like my entire childhood. I have never seen a place more hostile to a university than the place that I grew up. So basically, like there was just a recent push. I actually sat in the council meeting and said a dumbness in front of the whole room on record, but that's great. You can look it up if you want.
Nice. We'll clip that in.
Yeah. So they wanted to build on top of a big parking lot, which is parking lot for a supermarket and kind of a strip mall type deal adjacent to downtown. A big sort of 5/1, but kind of bigger type apartment complex with a supermarket at the bottom. And it was butt ugly. Okay, like the design, the architecture, it was not good. It had that horrible plastic siding that we have become known for in our 5/1s in New England. It like tries to look colonial, but it just looks like something you bought at Lowe's. Developer wanted to do this thing. There's tons of back and forth, blah blah blah, and then I started seeing these signs pop up around town with like a black background. It looked like something from Black Lives Matter, but just like totally misused by NIMBYs in our neighborhoods, saying stop building private dorms. Like there's never been a private dorm built in this town, but
with the three fists raised in all different shades, the three emoji fists raised.
It was one. It was like one step removed from that, and there were like a whole bunch of different ones. There was way too much effort put into this. And man, I heard some hateful bullshit at the council meeting. Like, there was one woman who was like, these young people are going to be wandering drunk through our neighborhood at all hours of the day and night. I was just like, oh, give me a fucking break. So I actually went up in front of the council and was like, first, I would like to address the Honorable Council by stating not everyone under the age of 25 is consistently drunk at all hours of the day or night. It's a great thing. I was so happy I said that in a council meeting. But yeah, and it ended up getting voted down. They didn't build the thing. The developer went back and like redesigned it and blah, blah, blah. And it just kept going back and forth. There were lawsuits and it never got built because there was this perceived fear of private student housing that these young people are going to take over our neighborhoods. Our kids won't be safe. Like, they're kids themselves, like guys, what are you doing?
the crime, all the crime that happens near college is like bikes getting stolen. Just lots and lots of bikes getting stolen. That's pretty much it.
I kind of want to roll this next section to what we're going to talk about sort of as the heart of this episode, which we're getting into at this point, 50 minutes into recording. Within urbanism, if we can even call that a movement, there is, kind of disagreement and, as within any movement, right? Anything that's related to decisions being made and politics and environment.
That's not true. Stuff. I disagree.
Thank you for proving my point, Mike. Oh, wait, that was your question. So, yeah, I'm just going to start this with, I saw a post on Reddit like a day or two ago where it was this raised cycle track in downtown Boston. And the post was something like, it was a beautiful picture, all this old mixed use stuff in the background. And it was the cycle track, it was well painted, it was raised, had curbs, everything. I was like, wow, it looks great. And that's what I thought the bent of the post was. But then I did get down to the comments and people were like, wait, are we supposed to actually like this? And everything like was super negative against it from people who I think were urbanists. And they're like, yeah, but like, people are always wandering from the sidewalk into the cycle track, I would be much happier with like a normal bike lane. And I was just like, what is happening here? So my point with mentioning this, and it kind of gets back also a little bit to what we talked about with Culver City, is that there's disagreement even among groups of people who should or would normally agree. And not that I think we should all completely agree on everything. I think it's very healthy to have a certain amount of disagreement and debate within a movement.
I see this a lot with when I like through Twitter, because I get this full feed of like bike advocates as well, is like sometimes the bent you get from people is no bike lanes until the revolution kind of thing. Like where unless we have the absolute perfect thing, like this is unacceptable. There's a bike advocate in Montreal I follow, and someone from like the DC Bicycle Union posted a picture of Hoboken's bike lane, which is one of the oldest bike lanes in New Jersey. It is it is probably the most used bike lane in New Jersey as well, but they recently painted it green and it's a raised cycleway as well. They recently painted it green. And this bicycle advocate from Montreal was like, oh, it's terrible. Like, it's ugly. Like, I see no one using it. And I had to go back at him. I was like, dude, you don't know anything about our area. Like, I lived in this place for years. It is the most wonderful bike lane. Everyone loves it there. Like, in the local context, we all love it. And I'm sure in the local context of that Boston suburb, I believe it was, I'm sure they all absolutely love that cycle path as well. It's like, as long as you are doing better than you did in the past in your area, like people will be happy.
Yeah, I guess the thing that's interesting is that there's always these small discrepancies, but I think people have to understand that exists even where the bike lanes are very, very good. I recently saw a video, I think the channel was called Build the Lanes or something, and it was about bike lanes in different Dutch cities, how there are some cities in the Netherlands that just openly defy the national standards for bike lanes just because they like to do things their own way. And it's kind of funny to see people in the Netherlands fight about that and say, oh, in this one town, like, they use these like really narrow curbside lanes where in maybe a city like the Netherlands, they would never do that.
I think it's the right type of argument to be having. It's like, Oh, wow. At least we can have this argument, you know?
Like the better thing is to frame it in a way where it's like, we want to see more bike lanes. We're glad there's more bike lanes, but like, let's get incrementally better at it while we're doing it. Let's just not keep doing the same thing over and over again. So it's like, you did it this way, fine. Next time we need to do a little bit better though.
You know, and I've been different places in Germany, and I've seen different levels of bike infrastructure everywhere I've gone. You know, where I'm working right now, I'm biking on the sidewalk, no bike lane. And then where I'm at, you know, otherwise there's actually proper raised cycle tracks with some painted stuff too. Yeah, it's a mixture, and you know, anything's an improvement over no sidewalk, no shoulder. Anything's an improvement over that.
The funny thing about the whole Montreal advocate is Montreal also has these bike lanes from the 80s, which are like no longer considered the standard for bike lanes. There are two-way cycle tracks that are at the level of the street on the side of the road. So they're considered dangerous nowadays. You could just say like, okay, so these have worked for a long time. They're there. We don't build them anymore, but they still haven't been changed in 40 years. So it's they did their job, but like we can use that as an example to move forward from.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I will say is I think it's important to have context of like what the purpose of bike lanes are. I think in a perfect world, we can have these discussions about what the best bike lane standards are in terms of creating the best comfort for cyclists and increasing the throughput of cycles if we're like having a situation where so many people are finally biking that we need to worry about that. But at least in the context of the current advocacy sphere is that they're there to protect the cyclists. And I think the more important thing is we need to slow down the traffic and ensure that the cars on the road aren't going to kill people riding their bike.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It should be almost like a gradient. From the further away from the building you get, the faster the speed. So it's like you have the people walking, they can go immediately into a storefront. Then you have the people biking, and then you have the people driving. Because an impact between a car moving at a safe inner city road speed and a bicycle is a lot less dangerous usually if they're moving the same direction than a person who's almost stationary by the car's perspective. And that's kind of how the design sort of should be. Maybe with the parked cars separating the bikes from the lane of travel.
I don't want to get to this too much, but there is some issues with complete streets, which is kind of the thing you're talking about, where it's talking about segregating every single mode of travel. But I'll leave that for another time.
This idea of disagreement and healthy argument within the urbanist sphere is to kind of preface our main topic for today, which is the book Strong Towns. So I think most of the people, most of us here, not all of us, arrived to the kind of urbanist sphere and learning to talk about cities through the lens of strong towns and as presented to us by Jason from Not Just Bikes. And, you know, I thought it would be interesting. I purchased the book a few years ago, and I just hadn't really had a great excuse to read it yet. I didn't feel like I was further enough along in my journey to think critically enough to read it, honestly, until I reached now, and I gave myself an excuse to read it for this podcast. And I know that, Mike, you also listened to the audiobook version of it as well. Matt is our litmus test for how well we're explaining or talking about something that he has not read or heard. And I just kind of want to have maybe a little bit of a discussion about the book, what our thoughts of were, and maybe a few takeaways and things, honestly, that we didn't like and did like.
Yeah, starting from the beginning, it's kind of a story to kind of get you to a position where you understand what complex adaptive systems are. So there's a lot of idioms and a lot of stories to get you to that point to understand what Chuck's trying to get you to see, which is places develop slowly over time and they build up on top of themselves. A one-story building that was built as a shack on a street gets turned into a two-story building, gets turned into a three-story building, so on and so forth. And everything kind of goes from the center, building up and outwards roughly at the same time. So that's kind of the general gist of the beginning of the book.
Yeah, and that's what I saw from it as well. There's a very big focus on incrementalism. There is a slightly less big focus as the book progresses on mixed use. However, it's still talking about it being critical. And yeah, I think for me, we forgot that as people. Like, one of his main points is there's all this stuff that humans kind of knew that we had learned through just figuring it out. And a lot of that stuff had been kind of forgotten in the US over the last 50, 60 years of experimenting with suburban style development. And that's something that I think maybe a lot of people who come at this originally from outside of the US perspective, outside of our sphere of Canada and America, that they may not understand how destructive and how great the loss of some of this knowledge was, because it wasn't completely lost here. In the words of J.R.R. Tolkien, some things were forgotten, which should not have been, and some things were remembered, which maybe shouldn't have been.
Well, that's incredibly fitting for this book, because Chuck loves to throw in examples to really random things where I'm not sure it fits.
Yeah, so let's structure this. Honestly, good things, incrementalism, mixed use. I think his views on how to approach some of this from kind of an apolitical direction is a very interesting and novel idea to make things actually happen when you have to have a book that applies across so many different towns and so many different places. Bad things. The stories, and some of them really do start to lose me. I think if I was an editor for this book, I could probably cut out about 30% of them at least.
Well, the first one is he talks about a villa in Pompeii, because we dug up this villa from Pompeii that was built on the outskirts of the city, and he talks about the story of them building an individual building, then having their friend build something with a shared plot right next to it, with the same wall, and then like the wife gets to cook and also sell stuff from the front of her house, because she can watch her kids while selling stuff, and the people go out and they'll farm grapes some years, and other years they'll cut down wood or something like that. And it's supposed to get you to this point where you're supposed to say, oh yeah, like things aren't super simple in life. Things are actually very complex. But all it really kind of brings up to me is that like there's a sense of pastoralism in like the ideology of growing from nothing to a very large city. And sometimes that view, this pastoralistic view, doesn't really apply all that well to a already built out modern city, which was devastated by urban renewal or whatever, and now we're trying to get it back into a great city again.
What I found the most interesting about that, I looked at it more like from the Pompeii's perspective, that he was trying to make the point that these people weren't all that different from us. Of course, lots of things have changed between now and then, but the idea that there's still somebody selling food out of a little shack on the ground floor, that's something that a lot of us can still kind of relate to. There's still like for me, I think it got a little bit like, I didn't know how much of what he was saying was backed up by research or just his own feelings from when he was there, and that's the thing. I don't need proof or evidence for everything, but there's some stuff where, I don't want to be made a fool of if I then talk about that in front of somebody who's like a freaking expert on the history of Pompeii, and they point out the million ways I'm wrong, and then my whole argument falls apart, or if I show this book to somebody,
It's structured in a way that a lot of self-helpy kind of books are structured, where it's like, quote someone famous, make a massive point on something, quote someone famous, make a point, like make up a story, or maybe not even make up a story, but like kind of make a story that is much more eloquent than it really is, and a lot more embellishment than it really is, and then like make a point off of that, which I don't particularly love that style of writing. I can understand why he did it though, because that was in vogue. First of all, when he wrote this book, that was like kind of the style of writing for these nonfiction books. But also, it's like the easiest way to prove a point to someone is to tell them a fancy story when they don't really understand much.
And it's sort of like him. It felt like him sort of going through and being like, okay, which one of these will stick? It's like you get thrown the same piece of information like several times in several different ways and see how it sticks. So Matt, to kind of, I just want to get your take on this. For you, where did your journey in urbanism and this kind of stuff start? Did it start from a strong town's not just bikes direction, or did it come from somewhere else?
I guess it was a combination of two things. One was that growing up, I liked trains a lot. I liked learning specifically about the trolley system in Philadelphia. And I think kind of learning about how that system was gradually deconstructed over time, and then eventually learning like, oh wow, like this is something that we should probably build again and have in other cities. I think there's like that kind of thing. And then I think also I was a huge fan and still am a huge fan of the 99% Invisible podcast, where Roman Mars, the host, just talks about the different ways that design and kind of the built world affect our lives every day. So kind of those two things. And then I kind of saw YouTube channels like Not Just Bikes and all those folks who kind of connect those two worlds together. And that's kind of how I got into it.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because you came at it from honestly not the most typical direction, but it is funny. There's definitely the train and transit world, and then there's the urbanism world. And it's funny how much those things overlap because, I'm somebody, I definitely, when I grew up, I was a massive train nerd, and I kind of hid it for a while, out of embarrassment and just like seeing what a lot of the content out there, at the time was with trains and stuff. It was usually somebody with foamer voice and sounded like they were from Michigan. Sorry, throwing shade on whatever Amtrak guy 365.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting dichotomy there because I feel like on one end, there are people who are into urbanism who are huge transit advocates, and they really think that the only way that we could challenge car dependence and make cities truly walkable is by building really solid urban rapid transit systems where trains just go everywhere and completely replace all other forms of transit. Granted, I'm just kind of making up a guy here. I don't think there are people who are really
man, if you will,
hard-lined on it. But I do think that this kind of ties into the strong towns discussion because I do think that there are urbanist advocates who are kind of on the other side. And at least from what Mike has told me about strong towns and the author Chuck Marohn, is he kind of thinks that, we don't really need to do these big projects at all. We just need to make small towns walkable and livable places where people are living on more of a community scale.
He goes at this time and time again. He said, we should never be thinking about this at a national scale. And even at the state scale, it should be very, very limited. Everything should come from like as close to the block level as possible. And he's even written an article once about how there was the incremental development of transit going from the golf cart picking up some people to the bus picking up people to like, the articulated bus picking up people. And that's just not how transit works. You cannot incremental your way up into transit.
I think that's interesting what you were saying about how that's presented in the book, because last week I listened to an episode of the Talking Headways podcast with the host Jeff Wood, and he was talking about Trevor Latimer's book. I can't remember the name of the book, but it's about like the case against localism, how, at least in his opinion, pretty much at every scale, it's better to make decisions about city planning at a higher level instead of a lower level. So interested to kind of see where you might be there in terms of like the strong towns versus that kind of take.
Yeah, and so like for me, I think when I hear something like that, it scares me a little bit because my journey into more leftist politics and things like that comes from almost a running away from people thinking that they're smarter or better than other people all the time in making decisions for them. And while I think that a lot of people really have no business in deciding how exactly their neighborhood should be planned, I still think that there's a piece of it where we need to still be democratic about things. And as much as I like the strong direction from the top and that it gets things done, I also really appreciate the upswelling movement from the bottom that kind of lifts everything and builds and builds and becomes a movement. And you can have both. These things are possible because it, like with the transit thing, you can't build all transit incrementally, but you can build some of it incrementally. You can't make all cities walkable all at the same time, but you also don't have to only do it incrementally. Like there are different sized increments.
So I come from it from a similar perspective as the author of that book. I am more of the thought that the higher form of government is the best place to do the planning at, because a lot of issues are faced regionally, where Chuck likes to talk about issues of like housing, where you can solve housing locally, where I don't think that's actually the case, because we have a 1 square mile town. There's quite literally no open plots of land in that town, but there might be a growth of 2% of people per year from that town. And they're not going to approve any new housing. So that burden cascades, that 2% burden of growth every year cascades to the neighboring towns. So now the neighboring towns have the burden of that population, and it cascades out from there. So when you have the regional planning, you could say this whole region as a whole is growing at this rate. There needs to be more housing, and we're not putting the burden on a single place. Everyone's going to share the burden of the extra housing. Or if you say, we need warehouses, like every business is looking for a warehouse right now. We don't want to put the whole burden on one township that is going to approve warehouses where, all of their neighboring townships are not going to approve warehouses. We need to say, okay, where's the best place to put warehouses? Where can we share the burden between different places? And where does this make sense? Having like this higher level thought of these things, I think is really the only way to solve some of the more thorny problems. I don't think there is a bottom up way to solve housing.
For me, I really think that we do need more regional planning in the U.S. in general. It's critically lacking. States don't talk to each other. Counties barely exist anyways in a lot of places. And in some places, they have more power than the state, but that's a different story. I think that, like with the housing thing, I think that one way it can be solved from the bottom, you need cooperation between the top and the bottom with this, in my mind, because you need regional planning that says, okay, we have 2% growth in city A. In city B, we have that's where all the land is. But the thing is, you still need cooperation with the local people that are owning that land to actually get them to build the thing. You also need then cooperation with the town level to say, okay, we need to pass ordinances that allows people to build the type of housing that the Regional Planning Commission wants. So maybe and I'm just kind of spitballing this here, maybe the coordination is coming from a higher level, and the people kind of getting out of the way or maybe encouraging it can happen at the town level, and the actual building of it can happen at the local level. I don't know. I saw something interesting with Brattleboro, Vermont, that they were talking about doing something like that.
I will say that's kind of what we have right now in a lot of the Northeast, is we do have regional planning commissions, but they are completely defanged. All they do is give recommendations. And then when you have 100 towns that are part of an MSA or like a general city area, you're waiting till the heat death of the universe for these people to actually implement these things. And every single step of the way, there's going to be pushback. And it's not about steamrolling local support. It's about realizing the issue, like having the general humanity to understand that we can't let people just not have homes. It's like, I'm sorry that's not an option.
Yeah, I think that's the case in this, the case against localism. Granted, I haven't read the full book. I've only listened to the author talk about it on a podcast, but what he says is that, local control is generally not a good thing, but sometimes it can be a good thing. There just needs to be a really good case for it. And I think a lot of times, and the author thinks this too, where local control is seen as the solution when it should really just be like local input in higher level planning.
I think this is really interesting to me because like in the US, one thing we actually do well, we do a lot better job marketing projects and getting buy-ins than they do here in Germany. Especially if you look at some of the big high-speed rail lines that have been stalled for years and years, it's because of a massive struggling and just an assumption that we can just do what we want sort of deal. And yes, they can usually just do what they want. However, it's so much easier for them if they get the buy-in of the people that are living there and like actually explain to them what they want to do. Not that you have to listen to every input, but you have to make people feel heard. It is somehow the most important thing. I think that's why we have kind of a potential to fix some of the stuff in the US, is because it's something that not everywhere, but some places we're good at that.
Like you said, like getting people to be on board is incredibly important. This isn't an urban renewal project. We're not going to like just go steamroll a whole community to do something. But it's also quite difficult because something might be the linchpin of transit system, and you just can't do it because there's like a really wealthy community between like two other communities that you want to connect, and there's like absolutely not. There's a point in time where you're selling this project on mobility, you're selling this project on the environmental sustainability. You have to have some point where it's like, okay, these are the facts, and unfortunately you do not see them. How do we tell someone it's like, you're actually wrong? Like there's by all objective measures, you're wrong. We have to do this.
Yeah. I think that, if people are really listening, and that's always the question, are they listening, right? I think the way I would approach something like that is going and saying, look, I completely understand your input. The problem is there is a different side to this, which is something that, if you come with me, I'll show it to you. But it's something which you can't see from your perspective, where you live, the way that you live. This is how different people live that are not you. And I absolutely want to show this to you, but you have to be like willing to look, and not everybody's going to get that. But with transit, there's a fear that, and I kind of actually want to do maybe a short video about this in the future. I just started a script tonight called Incremental Transit. And yeah, I know. I'm a fan of like, you build a big line and then you can slowly expand like feeder services off of it. And that's something that we built a big line, the Downeaster, 20 years ago in New England, and we're only now just starting to incrementally build feeder services off of it. And I had a great idea for one locally that I'll probably talk about in that video. But it's stuff like that where you build the thing, it works, it gets better and better. And then you say, okay, now I want to try this other thing. And sometimes you just need to fucking run the trains, like you just need to do it. There's a quote from the Maine DOT from like this summer where the Department of Transport head was just like, we're not going to screw around with doing a multi-million-dollar consultant study on if this thing will work. It's got to go like 4 stops. We're just going to repair the track a little bit. We're going to run the trains. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. That's the funding. The funding is going to be run the train as a study, basically. Do it for 2 years or whatever.
Yeah. There is the case for incrementalism when we talk about getting like a minimum viable service, but there's a cap to what you get from a minimum viable X to like repairing the thing up to the maximum capacity of what you just started with, which was like, So if you start with a single track railway that was a former freight line, and you're just going to put in some new ties and make it work for passenger service for a little bit, well, that will work good up until like, your 60 mile an hour, like medium speed commuter service. But then you want it to go to 100 miles an hour. All that gets thrown away, and then you restart, and you have to get rid of everything.
Yeah.
And the big issue with that is you got rid of everything while people were still using it. So that's like sometimes like the case like for build to completion for things like transit is you don't want to take something away from someone when they're using it.
Yeah, that's tough. I think part of that is there's like a mindset that of cities and places when they build this stuff, it's like, oh, we're only going to get one chance to do this. And sometimes that's correct, but sometimes it's not. And yeah,
from
a
technical sense, it can be correct. It's like you only have one right of way between two cities for rail tracks. you only get one chance because you cannot take this out of service once you put it in service.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think it's more like where cities say, okay, this is our only chance to do transit ever again. Like, we're never going to build transit ever again. Because unfortunately, the way things work in the US, cash is kind of rolled out in lump sums to build this stuff instead of it just kind of happening over time. It's like always, okay, political will. And then...
Yeah, just wait until I do my video on local capacity, because a lot of the issues that stem from only funding a project once every 10 years is you lose 100% of your local capacity. Everyone who knows how to build a tunnel leaves. They go and work for a consultancy for like a company like Granite, which is like one of the largest manufacturers in the US, or like a project manufacturers. They'll just leave for Granite, they'll become consultants, and then they'll just travel between cities in the US, work for this consultancy, making $400,000 a year doing tunnel projects in random places.
As you do.
But they left. It's like, so they're not going to be in New York anymore. Like, you have to, if you want to find that expert, you're paying this company like Granite, and you're
exactly. They'll steal your people and then sell them back to you at a 50% markup.
Yeah, I feel like there are some places where that makes sense, but cities like New York that are always going to have tunnels and are always going to continue building and maintaining tunnels, like, you got to really keep those people around.
Yeah. And like LA had a decent type of line of projects and will continue to. Like, that's the kind of place where you really want to keep those people forever.
Yeah.
It's just tough because there's no real incentive to do it. I think the solution there is to go up a level, have capacity at the state, and have the state worry about building the infrastructure, and then the local municipalities worry about running the service. But that's a whole different discussion.
I always forget that California does not have one transit agency, and New Jersey's pretty unique with that.
Oh yeah, that's like, that's a New Jersey thing. I think Rhode Island's the same way, but that doesn't even count because Rhode Island's like the size of Los Angeles.
Yes.
Yeah, with way less people.
Yeah, like WTF actually is Rhode Island. And getting back to the strong towns thing, I just want to, like, a few other things that I kind of wrote down when I was reading it was, I think it comes from a very pro-capitalist, it's very free market, very neoliberal, this idea that the ultimate way to determine if something is succeeding or failing is people vote with their dollars, and the government needs to be run like a business. And that's said in that book multiple times. And Chuck, if you ever hear this, I think you're a nice guy. I'd love to talk to you about this. It's always that way. Of course, good bakeries, bad bakeries will go out of business based on how much money they get. That's something I'm okay with. But when it comes to government, I don't think it should always be like that.
He makes a lot of good points and never finishes them off with a sort of comprehensive plan for solving these. There's a lot of ways where he can point and where it's like, okay, the issue is the financial market. What he's saying is like, okay, there's nothing you can do about the financial market. So this is how you solve it in your own town. And all of this kind of leads me to this book being overused for advocacy when it's really for advocacy like at a state level or a county level or a city level, when it's really meant for a literally a small town. And a small town that's not even in an urban metroplex. So it's the wrong device for a lot of people, especially because in the US, like something like 60 to 7% people live in like one of these large urban metroplexes. So it's gone farther than it should have. And there's some like strange things where he'll say a lot of the issues with getting these empty plots like continually maintained. It sounds like he's calling for something like a land value tax or some type of usage tax on that property, and then he'll kind of just skirt around it and like he'll find a way that it's like, oh well, the free market will fix it if you do X, Y, and Z. Or he also has this kind of idea that the city should start abandoning areas of the city, like just like cut off chunks of like if there's like services to just a couple buildings on a block, it's like maybe we should just abandon those blocks. And Matt,
I saw that look on your face. What is that look? And mind you, I've lived in Detroit for a summer, so I've seen what abandonment looks like in a city.
Yeah, I mean, it's It's a take, but I just don't think you're ever going to be able to win people over by saying that.
No, it may be true. It kind of, some places will happen, but other places, it'll Frankenstein along. I actually was thinking about this when I was reading the book. He doesn't really mention HOAs, but I've been saying this for years. Homeowners Association is a substitute for bad government. People, and actually a further extension of that is looking at the book where he talks about the financial insolvency of the suburbs. A lot of these HOAs essentially function to substitute that financial shortfall in maintaining their own little island. They, in some places, are taking care of the streets or even the sewage network. They're doing stuff that a government should be doing, and they're expensive, but they're not government.
Yeah, and the big thing about them not being government is they regularly go insolvent and have to be bailed out by the state.
Yeah. Woohoo.
That's like the general gist of it. It was just like it was too much of avoiding any sort of situation where regulation could be the solution. A lot of times he was talking about like, well, the issue is that they tore down this block and they built it with this. And I'm like, well, you can have regulation for drive-throughs. You can have regulations for maximum parking. And he just doesn't want to engage in any conversation that talks about the government having power to kind of actually fix these solutions. He wants personal responsibility to solve a lot of these issues.
This really shed a lot of light on it. I actually liked the last chapter. It talks about living an intentional life. And I think that's just kind of an interesting idea with urbanism. He honestly, I think, went on the same journey that a lot of people did, where he just like discovered things and they spoke to him in a certain way. I actually kind of identify with the guy in this way, but something he said was that when he talked about his politics, it was like very close to the end of the book. It was a quote from a speech that he gave. He's like, at the national level, I'm probably something like a libertarian. Let's do a few things and do them well. At the next level down, I'm probably like more fiscally conservative. At the next level down, I become more of a progressive. And then I become a socialist at the local level. You know, I'm like, I will give everything for the people in my town. You know, I will say, okay, if we need to raise taxes to make this thing happen, raise taxes. If we need to, do this to make something good happen, do it. Like the people should, be in control of base. He stopped short of basically saying the people should be in control of the means of production. But, and then the last level, he was like, on the family unit, I'm literally a communist. I was like, okay. But, it was just really interesting. I think that's a really weird and interesting standpoint to have.
Honestly, I think it's actually very common, and I actually really dislike it because I think it's a common lack of empathy for the rest of people. Is like the first thing you should say is like, everyone deserves to live in a house. Everyone deserves to have fresh water. Everyone deserves to be able to use the bathroom in their own house. It's a common level of empathy that I think is very much lacking from that view, where people are just like, well, the thing that matters around me are the people right next door. And it's like, well, the people right next door have the same life circumstances as you. They grew up right next to you. Like, there's a mirror copy of you. And you
and
almost
he does preface it. He does preface it a little bit like earlier, where he's talking about when he got to help out Jews in New York City or something. Like he was like helping out a different culture. I don't remember his exact point with that, but yeah, no, I totally understand you.
That's a common refrain.
So I think that is accurate, though. I think that like that level of empathy is like really common. I think what's different is that he's acknowledging the fact that he is different politically at different levels of government. I think that's what's really interesting to me, because I don't even do that. I had not thought about it like that. For better or for worse, I think that piece of it to me was interesting.
I don't think you wanting to do stuff for your neighbors, like your direct neighbors, is having empathy. I don't think that's empathy in my world. I think that is greedy. It is greedy on top of the surface for you to only want to do things. You want to do the best thing for the person who's direct in contact with you. I want to do the next best thing for the person who's right next to me, right? And afterwards like that. Because this is kind of assumption that like, okay, everyone's going to do this and it will make the world perfect because everyone's going to help the people around them, and it's just going to work out to the perfect system. But like, what about the places where like no one has a job? Like, how are people helping out each other there? Like, do you just tell them to go fuck themselves because they don't have people around them that can actually like help them out?
That's fair.
It's a misunderstanding of how the world works.
Yeah. And Matt, I just kind of wanted to ask you about this because I think that things in California are sometimes to the point where people maybe don't even help their neighbors, like where your literal empathy ends at your fence line. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, I don't really think the people are really any different in that way. I mean, I think like how many people talk to each other in public might be a little bit different, but I don't really see a difference between how people feel about their neighbors. I mean, there's different communities where people are very tight-knit and want to help each other, but there are also communities where people really don't want to do that, especially like richer neighborhoods with big fences between the houses. But
yeah. I just hear these stories of like, oh, my lemon tree grew across somebody's fence line. Next thing you know, the whole fucking lemon tree got like cut down, and it's like a lawsuit that ties up the courts for the next 10 years.
Yeah, I don't think that's that common.
I think these probably come from people from the Midwest who are just like, I want to make fun of people from California, which is very easy to make fun of people from California because they're in the media and they have peculiarities, just like people in the Midwest have peculiarities, but they're not in the media.
I know.
I want to say one last thing on Chuck's book. Just say the issue is capitalism. Yeah. Please, just say Chuck, every single time you're biting at the corners. It's like the issue is global capitalism.
Yeah. Yeah. I probably know where he's coming from because I think I grew up the same way. And if I hadn't been snapped out of it when I had in university, I probably would have, he's in his 40s or 50s. And it's harder to change those opinions the older you get. And I think that he probably grew up pretty conservative. I mean, he even mentions that, and that he's only, as he's gotten older, moved further to the left as he's learned more about this stuff, which is kind of the opposite of what most people do.
He's more accepting of like solutions that may involve slightly higher levels of government.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that Strong Towns is a good start. I think that it as a name carried the movement forward. And I think that you have to be a critical reader. When you read or consume anything, you have to be looking at this and you have to say, what parts of this deserve to be listened to? What parts of this have value? And what parts of this are misleading me or are maybe not correct based on my observations?
And that's very difficult to do when this is the intro book for a lot of people in this subject.
Yeah, I still need to read Jane Jacobs. I still need to read Jeff Speck, Walkable City. And then I'll see if those are better intro books, and then I can actually recommend or not which one's better. Yeah, so I recently started an Instagram for the YouTube channel that I have, The Rural Urbanist. The name on Instagram is one and the same. You should be able to find me with, it's the same photo. I really try to only post pictures that either myself or my wife took, and also really currently am only posting my film photography because it looks better. And I honestly have no other outlet for it. So please feel free to go check me out at The Rural Urbanist.
I mean, I'm working on a video. It'll be ready eventually.
Soon.
Is that not where we're all at?
Yeah. I really want to make progress on the Burrowitis video. I filmed a bunch of stuff. I really want to get drone shots. No one in New Jersey wants to do drone shots, so I guess there's not going to be any. Sorry.
Well, isn't it like really hard to film in that area?
It is. It's kind of, there's a few airports around here, and a lot of these towns don't allow it. But whatever. Oh yeah, I'm also by a military base. That probably doesn't help.
Yeah, I'm also working on a video. It's taking forever because I need perfect focus to write literally anything that isn't hot garbage. And then I need to sit on it for several months and then keep rereading it and changing things. Because I hate myself and I never want to release another video ever again.
Yeah, that sounds like an effective way to get content out. That's
especially
that's
with
the
my
real
laptop
tent
from
mill.
2016 and no video card to do video editing on. It's great.
On that note, see you all next
Bye.
2 weeks.